Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest is the author of the Immigrants from Earth science fiction series, the first book of which is Mutiny on the Omaha. His name is Don Holman, and here's my interview with Don. Don Holman, welcome to Apollo Papyrus.
I'm glad to be here.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Okay, I'm a small town boy from the prairies. When I got my driver's license, I inherited the job of milking the family cow, which was just right out of town, right on the border of the town, because cows weren't allowed in the town. And no matter what the weather, whether it was, 90 plus degrees out or minus 40 with a 40-mile-an-hour wind, I remember that day, I still had to milk the cow. I grew up working on farms, working with tools. My father had a shop in the basement. So I started at about age 7. I started learning how to use all the tools. And logically, I became an engineer. Always wanted to write, but I'm still not the best speller. I'm a lot better than I used to be, but I had to get a computer with spell checking before I could make much progress writing.
Now, you talked about how you became an engineer from learning how to use tools on the farm. Why didn't you get a PhD?
Well, I was almost there when my wife was hit by a car. She was on a bicycle, suffered traumatic brain injury, and it just deteriorated. I never got I did the research, but never got the dissertation or the last final course done.
I hope your wife made a recovery.
Well, unfortunately, she really didn't. And it was one of those hidden injuries. So I took care of her for 42 years before she had a stroke, and now I visit her because I was no longer able to take care of her.
Now, you have one book that is published without spoiling too much of it. What is it called and what is it about?
Okay, the book, it's kind of an introduction. I wrote it partly because I was frustrated, and I figured the main book that I was working on at the time needed something a little simpler to introduce it. It's called Mutiny on the Omaha. The whole series, which is called Emigrants from Earth, meaning people that leave Earth, immigrants from Earth, is based on a faster than light drive being developed in the future and people leaving Earth for the stars, for the Goldilocks planets that are now being discovered out by the astronomers. And it's what I project might happen in the future based on what's happening on Earth today. Faster than light travel, people say it's impossible, but then they also told you in high school that the speed of light was a constant, E equals mc squared. Light, oh, see, that's a constant, never changes. Then they told you, oh, there's black holes, and the gravity is so great, light can't leave. Teacher, last year you told us that C was a constant. How come now you're telling me that it can't go out from a black hole? So logically, if when gravity is infinite, the speed of light goes to zero, when gravity is zero, the speed of light should go to infinity. So that's the basis of my faster than light drive. The fact that you just have to play with the gravitational fields. And gravitational fields are much more pervasive than they talk about, black matter, dark matter, and all this stuff. Well, it all contributes and all is all part of gravity. So you have to develop and the physics, don't ask me the physics because I'm not a physicist, but engineering wise, it seems simple enough to, I'm on the line. It seems simple enough to say that if you can exclude all the effects of gravity, the speed of light should go to infinity.
Now, regarding some of your books that are currently in the works or yet to be published, what are a few of them about without spoiling too much of them?
Oh, it's consider what happened when settlers first came to America. They found basically a wilderness. Uh, they found population, which I don't think we'll find in space, but there's all the challenges, all the unknowns, all the interesting things that might happen as people go into space and develop worlds, new worlds. Most of them will be what I call frontier worlds, where you have very few people. You have to find the resources. You have to develop everything. So there's a lot of challenges. Then later on, as it becomes, you know, easier because people know more about developing new worlds, then the great big companies, of course, are predominant. And some of them will basically own multiple worlds. So they're very, very large and very powerful entities. And of course, very large, powerful entities tend to get very hidebound and do things that really they shouldn't do. So that is part of the whole thing. And then, of course, there's the eccentric trillionaires that want to have a world, their ideal world. You know, the old theory about developing the ideal society. Yeah. Well, I have a trillionaire that develops a society of engineers and keeps it secret. But then eventually, after a few generations, uh, they want to check out all this mathematical formulas that they come up with, you know, crowd control and all this sort of thing, the mathematics of groups. So they go out into some of the newer uh, colony worlds and try to apply it. And they end up starting a war between the new colony worlds and the older colony worlds and Earth, which of course ends up badly for them because Earth is still a huge powerhouse with all the people and all the manufacturing capability it has. That's Mutiny on the Omaha is the story of a young computer genius that doesn't know he's a genius that starts out, joins the Navy, the Space Navy, uh, because he likes playing with computers and he wants to play with the computers that control the great big battleships and so on. And he ends up in a situation where the only way he can do his job is if he's promoted to be a senior officer. So he gets a field promotion, legitimate or not. He's, you know, on that space station. He's number 3 in command to get the computer working right, because until it works right, the the station and all the people on it are not can't do their jobs. And so the Mutiny on the Omaha is the story of this young man as he goes through various stages and positions. Some of them totally make work. Oh, we don't have a job for him, so we'll put him on as a steward on a shuttle, shuttling people up and down from space up for rest and recreation. Then just his various adventures, what he sees. Uh, then it ends up that he is an undercover person on this battleship called the Omaha, and the mystery that is on the ship. Something is wrong. You know, there's this a smell and it doesn't smell right, so they send him to try to solve it. And that's the where the name comes from. Is the Mutiny on the Omaha. So it's a his life from the time he basically graduates high school until he gets this special super assignment. Then the other stories, the next one in the series, and there's a main series and then there's kind of branch books. Uh, the main series is called Ghost Planet. And that is a ghost planet is one that is not registered with the Federation. So it's not, the laws don't apply, etc. There's lots of uh, consequences from this. During the war that started lasted a very long time, lasted 28 years, mainly because if you're familiar with history, the wars with France and so on were very long, not especially because the battles lasted long, but because it took a long time for ships to go to the New World and back again. And a lot of the battles and fighting was in the Caribbean or in the Pacific Ocean with Spain. And so just transportation and the travel time between stars makes interstellar war a very long and drawn out affair. And so the consequences of just the physics and the travel times and so on, due to the faster than light travel, is very important to the stories because you've got the physics, the limitation of the physics of the faster than light drive. So the stories they're not compressed. I mean, if you wanted to make a TV series out of them, you could uh, have a whole bunch of series because there's lots of things that happen in the books. But they're fun stories. They're interesting. I try to expose people to the new environments, what is possible, what is might happen, uh, the consequences. I set up a physical world, and due to the constraints of that world, a lot of the story is controlled by the constraints of the physics, the environment, and so on. And that's in all my stories. I try to present things that are interesting and new, and to help people think about things other than just the way they are on Earth. There's a whole universe out there. Let's learn about it and have fun doing it.
What are you mentioned that spelling's a hard part about writing for you. What is the easiest part about writing a book for you?
The description. I think visually, so I could describe the uh, the events, the environment, the various things on Ghost Planet, the basic environment or the basic ecology is that the animals have 6 legs instead of 4 legs. For uh, and there's so if an animal has six, think of an alligator with 6 legs and how it would walk and what the consequences would be and how would it catch prey. Well, if you sort of cross the alligator with the mythical dragons of China and sort of give that alligator some flexibility, then I come up with a way that that alligator can outrun a horse because it has 6 legs. It goes 2 legs at a time, front, middle, back, front, middle, back, front, middle, back. So it can really get out and move. Its legs are a little longer than the alligator's legs, of course. But things like that, just fun things. Birds. If you have 6-legged animals, then you've got birds with 2 sets of wings. Just fun things, and the consequences of them. The the people are pretty much people, but dealing with new things, it makes for interesting stories and fun stories.
Regarding your book that's published now, is that self-published, traditionally published, or published by a hybrid press? And regarding your other books, how do you intend to publish those?
Well, since I'm not a very good publicist, I'm much better engineer than I am a salesperson. I can talk one-on-one once I meet somebody, but I'm not good at, going out there and doing it. So I self-published. Unfortunately, I didn't pick the best publisher because I haven't got a dime from the first book. Uh, and I know there's been some sales, but they never even sent me a statement. But even though that cost me, I'm still bound and determined to get my books published. So I'm pressing on. If I can find a traditional publisher that wants to carry them, great. Otherwise, I'll just carry on publishing myself, and through podcasts and whatever, I think I can interest people in reading them. They're fun stories. They're educational. They're the characters vary, of course, but the when I was young, we had a very, very good library in our small town. And I read, they had a series of books on the heroes of the Americas, Thomas Jefferson, Daniel Boone, David Crockett, all the Lincoln, etc. And I read a lot of those stories. And uh, I enjoyed the adventure, the the story of the people maturing and coming of age, if you will. So a lot of my stories are coming of age stories. Of course, I also like Louis L'Amour and the Western and the other books that he wrote. So I perhaps, if you read them, there may be a little bit of that style. He's better at dialogue than I am, but I think I do pretty much as good a with description as he does. So it's there's a variety. Some of my books are, well, how do you think of a world uh, that has no metal or very, very little metal, and how would you develop technology? Uh, you have the knowledge of technology, but not the materials. How do you, oh, for instance, beer is pretty easy to make. It's sort of a natural thing, the wine, beer. But if you want something stronger, and my main character doesn't drink, but of course other people do, uh, how do you make strong spirits without metal? I come up with a way of doing it, and it's, totally feasible as far as physics go and as far as having no metal goes. But it's things like that I find fascinating, and I write myself into a corner and then have to figure out how to get out of it. And that was one of the corners I wrote myself into, and I had to figure out how to make strong spirits without metal.
As you mentioned, your main characters start out as young men facing a crisis or change of some kind. How do you develop those type of characters that are typical of characters in coming of age books?
Through experience. They in Mutiny on the Omaha, the first one I published, uh, he gets sent to he signs up for the Navy. He has to have his mother sign his papers. His father was a physicist. He developed uh, an advancements in the faster than light drive, and he took off to test it and was never heard from again. So he's orphan. His father's gone. His mother is facing the bills, and they borrowed. His father borrowed a lot of money to get the ship done, and they're taking away the house. They're taking away the pension. You know, bankruptcy, etc. She declares bankruptcy to try to keep it. is not successful, and it has to go live with her sister. Their sister doesn't have room for a teenager or his computers, and the town that she lives in doesn't have a university. So he wants to go to learn more. His big thing is computers, so he figures, oh, the Navy has uh, all these advanced computers that I've been learning about, reading about. So I join the Navy and work on computers. So he signs up, and he is very fortunate to hit somebody that recognizes some of his capabilities during the 1 week of testing that they all go through, intensive testing before they're assigned to a branch, Marines, Navy, Army, etc. And so he takes him under his wing and shepherds him through the classes that he has to take to qualify to go to the school where these computers that he's so interested in are made. And he is successful, and he goes off to the nearby planet, relatively speaking, only a few light years, uh, and goes to the school, which is basically the manufacturing facility for these plants, for these computers. And it's the adventures, what happens to him on the way, the school, how he adapts. Uh, right after the school, he gets sent to another school. And while he's at that school, the planet is attacked. And he comes up with a way to help defend the planet. So he's brilliant, obviously, but he's very retiring, and his brilliance is not really taken advantage of until much later, after he's a little more mature, he's had a few more adventures, and then he's stuck on this. It's a nickel iron asteroid that's been turned into a defensive asteroid that is the space base where he gets promoted to be an officer. And what happens, the problems how he solves the missing computer problem, uh, and then there's another attack, and shows up very well, and he's finally sent to officer training school, and after that to staff college. And he comes up with another idea for improving the ability to fight the war. And since he's the one that thought it up, and since he's shown himself capable, he's assigned to build it. And so he goes back to the planet where he was born, where his mother is, and sets up the plant and all the adventures and so on that happens there, and just follows him through a progression of situations and jobs until he meets his final challenge on the Omaha.
I have one final question. Many of the situations you write about are more reminiscent of pioneer stories than the type of science fiction that would be featured in, just to give one example, the Star Trek franchise. Why is this?
Well, if you go to a new planet, it is equivalent in many ways of the pioneers coming to America, the Pilgrims, the Jefferson, whatever plantation or my mind.
The Jamestown colony, is that what you're thinking of?
The Jamestown colonies. So they had very, very basic problems that they were facing. And basic problems bring out the best and worst in people, mostly the best in people, because otherwise, if they don't help each other, they don't survive. And my background, my reading, one of my favorite books is Kim by Rudyard Kipling, and it's a young man that becomes a undercover agent for the British Secret Service in India. Uh, that kind of story and the situation, if you go into space, you've got potentially thousands of planets to settle and a very, very small number of people to do it. Their challenges are going to be very basic challenges. Yes, they have advanced technology, but if you understand technology, and I try to make it understandable and the whys and wherefores in my books, you first have to develop the industry, the technology, the industrial base, the infrastructure before you can have things like Star Trek and Star Wars or anything like that. They skip all the basic stuff, in my opinion. So this is kind of a fill-in between where we are now and these very futuristic uh, tales, adventures. So it's the adventures on the way to getting to the ones that we think about as science fiction. It's science because engineering and the ecology and everything, it's science is the basis of everything. Uh, I say that civil engineering is the basis of civilization. Without civilization, without civil engineering, you don't have civilization because you don't have the roads, you don't have the the manufacturing plants, you don't have sanitation, you don't have a water supply. So engineering is the basis of everything, and every world that you go to has different problems because the ecology, the terrain, the temperatures, the resources are all different. So you've got an adventure every time you go to a new planet. You've got the adventure of developing the planet and what how society works is going to be dependent upon what you find where you go and people's reaction to it. So it's there's a lot more out there than people realize and a lot more complicated than most people realize. I mean, eggs don't suddenly appear at the store. You've got transportation to get them there. You've got the chicken farm or the egg farm. You got the chickens, the breeding of the chickens, chicken diseases, uh, the feed. You have to feed them. Where does the feed come from? Everything is more complicated than most people realize. And I try to give a little more rounding and education and understanding of the world around us through looking at the thing from other planets, other situations. So that is the adventure and the fun of reading my books is being exposed to new things.
Don, it was very fascinating to hear about your work. I thank you for appearing on Apollo Papyrus, and regardless of what publishing route you take in the future, I hope you find a better publisher, whether it be self-published, traditionally published, or hybrid, uh, that will actually give you earnings reports.
Yes, that would be nice. I My main problem, I think, is just exposure. I think the stories are pretty good. If parents want to have their kids uh, exposed to something more than Game Boys and online chats and so on, have them, develop their brain, think of new things, think of the possibilities and the problems of the world. Have them read my books. I think most parents would find that they're wholesome. Uh, the first one has one little thing where he's exposed to the senior side, if you will. He runs away. I mean, that's probably the smartest thing that he could have done. But that's what I would have done, I think, at that point. So why not? Uh, at the end of the book, he's still not married, so he still has adventures ahead of him, and the story, you know, there's lots of room for all these stories to continue and to go into more detail.
Don was a fascinating guest to interview. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write and read your passion. Bye for now. Remember to subscribe to the Apollo Papyrus YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/@ApolloPapyrus and the Apollo Papyrus Substack newsletter at apollopapyrus.substack.com. Y'all can visit the Apollo Papyrus website at campaaronapollo.wixsite.com/Apollo Papyrus and follow Apollo Papyrus on Threads, Instagram, Facebook, and Tumblr at Apollo Papyrus. Copyright 2024, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.